Everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Allison Weiss, and I'm the Associate Director of Corporate and Executive Education at the Brown School of Professional Studies. We are so happy you have joined us here for our monthly Lessons in Leadership webinar series, because we know that good leaders make a huge difference to people's lives. Every year, Gallup does a big survey where they survey many leaders in the US workforce, and they ask them to name the industry trends that they're seeing. And every year for the last several years, they have found a really alarming statistic. 70% of the US workforce reports being disengaged. And that is really alarming because a lot of us spend more than 50% of our working lives at work. And so that means that the way the world works now is not working for most of us, which leads to worse outcomes and worse mental and emotional health and worse, sense of inclusion and belonging at work. So this actually really matters. But the literature also shows that leaders can make a huge difference and really turn that around. And we need people like you who are willing to take time out of your busy lives and busy days to attend a webinar like this to lead that change. So thank you for being here today. And we hope that you will consider the Brown University School of Professional Studies as your partner in choice for building the skills and the networks that you need to change the way the world works for good. We offer a fairly comprehensive portfolio of programs that range from master's degrees to professional programs, including certificates and short courses, and also custom programming that help you access the in-demand skills that you need in a flexible format that fits in your schedule. So you'll see from the slide that we offer 33 professional and early career masters, some of which have residential components, some of which are fully online, and some of which are hybrid. We also offer custom programs for organizations that can be made in any format that meets your needs. And we also offer over 30 non-credit short courses and certificate programs, all with the goal of upskilling you and giving you the resources that you need to lead the change that we desperately need to see. All of our programs are research-backed. We work with incredible faculty leads who design and lead these programs based off of evidence-based theories of what works. Our programs are designed to meet you where you're at. So whether you are early in your career, middle, or a seasoned executive, we have a program for you. We also offer flexible delivery formats. Some of our programs are fully synchronous, some are fully asynchronous, many are somewhere in between, and some are in person and some are online. In particular, we focus our programming on three subject matter areas, and that is based on the intersection of Brown's area of expertise and what we have seen as being in high demand in the workplace. We offer programs in health, data and technology, and leadership. In health, we have a Master of Healthcare Leadership and Digital Health Innovation Certificate, and a full portfolio of both short programs and certificate programs in mindfulness. On the data and technology side, we have a Master of Technology Leadership, an Applied AI and Data Science program, and an upcoming program on AI ethics and governance, which we're really excited to launch in the fall. And on the leadership side, we have an Executive MBA program, an Applied DEI Strategy Certificate, a full portfolio on coaching, effective communication program, an executive program in general management, which will also be launched in the fall. It'll be a 3-course certificate, and we're really excited about that one. And then innovation leadership can be imbued into custom programs. And as you can see from this graphic, all 3 of these are also available in custom programs that can come to your organization. And we can either take any of these programs and package it up and bring it directly to your organization, or we can build something from scratch utilizing these areas of expertise. And you have the opportunity to influence the future of our programming. We are constantly innovating and launching new programs based off of your needs. And so towards the end of today's webinar, we're actually going to poll you to see what you would like to see us offer in the future. So we're really excited to see what you have to say. And with that, I am thrilled to introduce and hand things over to our faculty lead who will be leading us through today's masterclass, Ed Barrows. Ed is our professor of the practice in leadership, and he is absolutely incredible, though he hates it when I tell you that, but it's true. He has worked with leaders of all levels in the areas of strategy, strategic leadership, and leader development for the past 25 years. He is an ICF certified coach, an International Coaching Federation certified coach, and a member of Harvard's Institute of Coaching. Before we were lucky enough for him to join us here at Brown, Ed worked as a managing director at Duke Corporate Education, where he was responsible for designing and delivering programs for a portfolio of global clients. And before Duke, he worked with a variety of professional services positions with Deloitte, General Electric, PwC, and the Palladium Group, where he was vice president and leader of the executive education organization. And what I think is really unique about what Ed brings and what you're going to experience in just a moment is that he has such deep expertise in teaching and also such deep expertise in what actual industry leaders need, because he's been in your position as well. And so the last housekeeping note I have for all of you before I turn things over to Ed is that we will be taking your questions throughout. So if you have a question, don't wait till the end. I'm going to be monitoring the Q&A throughout. So if you have a question, please click on the bottom bar of your Zoom, click on the Q&A button, and type and submit your questions there. We'll answer as many as we can at the end, and it helps to get all of your questions in advance so I can combine as many as we can to get to as many as possible. So with that, I will turn things over to you, Ed. Welcome. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for teaching us how to develop clear messaging.
Thank you, Allison. I'm going to have to shorten my bio since you're going through all the gory details of it, but thank you for that. And it's nice to see everybody. Thanks. I've got current students, Nuri and Teddy. How are you? Past students, Carolina, Cindy. It's great to see all of you. And if I've missed you, I'm sorry. Kim, I know I need to get back to you. I saw you on here too. So it's great seeing everybody. Again, delighted that you're here. Want to make today as useful as possible. It's not a topic that people love necessarily. It's not as exciting as executive presence, which was a high watermark for us here. But it's, I would say, equally as important. If you remember from the ABCs of executive presence, you know that this is the last piece, communication. It's the C. So what we want to do today is really dig into that. And I have a few, I would say, really core tips to leave you with that I think will be very helpful. So hopefully you can incorporate those, I would say, quickly in the work that you're doing. And to Allison's point, please chime in with questions. It'd be great. And also share information. I like that. These are participative. They don't have to be just about me talking. You have things to share with your colleagues in the chat, by all means do. So just for those of you who are new, I'll hit lessons in leadership and 12 skills very quickly. I want to spend the bulk of the time on the skills discussion today, developing clear messaging, and then talk to you about some things to think about action stepwise. So you'll see on the Brown SPS website, School of Professional Studies, if you're not as familiar with it as some folks, we've got a lot of content. We've been putting out articles. We have a newsletter we're sending out every month. I've had the good fortune of working with my colleagues to write some of the articles for that. So please check that out. There's things I think you'll find useful. They're quick reads. Also, you can check out what else we'll be talking about in lessons in leadership in our core leadership skills piece. And there's also replays of things that maybe you have missed. So in the 12 skills methodology that this is built on, we're going to talk about clear messaging today. We've hit strategic thinking, problem solving, and executive presence. If, again, you haven't had a chance to listen into those, feel free to visit the SPS website. You can go to the recordings there. But every month for the rest of the year, we'll be covering off on these particular skills. There's the 6 skill areas that you see on the periphery of the dartboard model, and then there's the individual skills. And I was thinking today, as I was putting together the discussion points for our conversation, really the idea behind this methodology is to try to give you the 80-20 or the Pareto principle, or if you've ever heard of the 80-20 principle, distill down all the leadership that we came across into the handful of skills that will give you the biggest bang for your buck, so to speak. And these are the ones that we think, Laura and I think, would be the most useful. So that's why there's these 12. There's other things too. We're not saying that those aren't useful. Certainly they are, but really for being a leader that wants to be effective, to the point that Allison made, and there's lots of room for improvement. These are the things that we want you to work on. So again, 12 skills methodology. I will put the workbook up there post session today so that you can grab that and work along. You don't need it for today, but you will have access to it. Just go, if you've joined already, great. You just put in your email and you can grab it and join the newsletter as well. So all this stuff is there for you, and I think you'll find most of it pretty useful. So why clear messaging? Why are we talking about this? It's a topic that you probably have seen plenty of things on, but using our structure and the things that are changing in the workplace today. From a market standpoint, one of the things I've noticed, and I have worked with and do work with a number of executive organizations, leaders, especially people in organizations, have a sense that the future is uncertain, markets are uncertain. And what they're looking for leaders to do is give them some assurance and some clarity around what the future will look like. You can't do that with certainty, obviously. Otherwise, you'd be making billions of dollars predicting the future and having people pay you for that if you had that kind of accuracy. But the reality is people want some sense of, and that's why we have the strategic thinking piece to, well, what might happen in the future. The same thing is true of technology. You know, what will be the impact of technology on the workforce? One of the students in the classes that I teach here at Brown, Brad's name, had a conversation around strategic thinking with his team, and he said there was a lot of I would say almost angst or concern about what was going to happen with their jobs. I don't think that was unique to his organization. I think a lot of organizations feel like that today, and they're looking for clear communication on what we know and how the technology changes we're experiencing in the workplace may impact them, or at least give them some different choices and things to think about. The workforce, we talk about this every time, is really different. We've got a lot of people in the workforce, a lot of different groups, a lot of different ages, a lot of different perspectives, and that's great. But we have to make sure that we're communicating in a way that's clear and plain and direct for everybody at a high level. But at an individual level, we do also need to meet people where they are. So being clear on messaging is important to that. And then organization-wide, if you communicate to large organizations, I was talking to a student of ours in our Master Technology program today that's in the office doing a coaching training with it we have. You know, he's saying he supervises 300 people. That's a lot of people. Some of you may be more, some of you may be less, but organizationally, there's a lot at stake when you communicate. It can be costly to have poor communication or inaccurate communication. So we want to give you some real bits today that you could use right away to improve your messaging effectiveness. And we say messaging because it's not necessarily just speaking. And you see in one of the, literally one of the textbooks there, it's not just in person or in speech, it's in print, it's online. There's a lot of different channels and a lot of different tools and mechanisms we use to communicate. So the idea is the messaging covers off on a lot of that. So there's some books there. I'm not making the case that you should have those. I mean, these are the kinds of things you see in this space. And if you've taken an MBA course or got an MBA at some point, or even just built your own skills within your organization, you usually come across communication. Super Communicators is by Charles Duhigg. That just came out, I think, in February. He's a great writer. I read his book on the power of habits. I enjoyed it. New York Times author. But again, really, really good value in thinking about how important communication is today. Now, I wanted to summarize what your value will be, and I typically cover that, but I tried to distill it down to one thing. And I ran it by my colleagues, Allison and Jonathan, who helped prep for this. And here's what we came up with, or should say I came up with. When you think about your value, you know, we're really going to step up your Riz today. And we get this from Gen Z Translator. And here's some Gen Z folks over here. Now, if you're in Gen Z, you're familiar with this terminology. I am not. And my kids who are always remind me that I don't sound anything like someone who's part of Gen Z. But Gen Z is one of those, I would say, parts of the workforce that we focus on a little bit humorously as well. But every part of the workforce, whether it be the baby boomers or someone just coming into the workforce or a Gen X like myself, we all have kinds of vernacular that we use. And if you text regularly, you'll notice some of this tends to show up messaging wise. And that's understandable given the shorthand nature of communication. And Riz actually, interestingly enough, was the word of the year by Oxford last year. But that being said, we want to make sure when we're communicating, we're doing it in understandable, plain language that everybody can understand. So this is our stepping off point to say that while we gain some comfort in using some shorthand communication wise, we also want to ground it in some effective principles. And that's what we're going to walk through today. So in all seriousness, in addition to learning new words that have been added to the dictionary, things that you'll take away, you want to gain an awareness and think about how do I communicate? How effective am I? Most people won't walk up to you and say, you know, I wanted to let you know you're not an effective communicator. So we'll have to do some self-monitoring in this case and really think about, are there ways to improve our effectiveness? We want to try to think about some of the different needs and styles of audiences. They vary greatly. So how do we make sure our messaging lands with the audiences that we do want to communicate with? Simplicity and structure is important in communication. And we have a little activity that we'll work through, I think you'll find is interesting. and is really, I found it over the years to be really helpful. I didn't create it. I certainly won't take credit for it, but I found it as a very helpful way to keep in mind this letter from Lucy when it comes to communicating, and then really making sure that the messages you do create and distribute land with maximum impact to the audiences that you intend them to land with. So let's think about this a little bit further and sort of run through our quick, let me see, assessment for you. So think about, again, we do this every time over the course of your career. The questions are a little bit different. Think about someone that you've worked with or work with currently who you would say, wow, that person is really good. He or she is really effective in their communication skills. The question then becomes, what is it that they do? And then what we'll do here, oops, sorry, I'm one. Before we get to that, think about how well you communicate. Sorry. So do this quick little assessment, again, 0 to 3. Think about where you do, I would say, a good job communicating and where maybe you need some help. So think about when you think about communicating or getting ready to craft a message, do you clarify what the purpose, think through, and even oftentimes say what the purpose of the communication is? Do you think about the needs of your audience? When you build your message, do you do so really with the forethought of what's going to land here? Do you think about the medium that you're going to choose for your audience and then the way the message will be conveyed channel-wise to deliver maximum impact? So give yourself a quick score there, 0 to 3, and then you can total those up. I think you can figure out how you get there. And I'd be very interested in seeing the chat and monitoring, how do people rate themselves? What score would you give yourself? So go ahead and put it in the chat, and then we'll talk a little bit about what some exemplars do in this area. No one's assessing themselves. Let's see some folks. 14, good. 10s, 9s, that's good. 10s, 9s, excellent. 14, great. Perla, good. 8 to 10, give yourself a range. So we have some strong communicators with us today. So that's very good. There's always a way, someone who's being honest with a 7, in addition to everyone else who's being straightforward. So it sounds like people are doing a good job with it. So that's great. So then the question is, where can we top up our communication? And if you're in the lower end, I see some scores that might be a little bit lower. That's okay. That's the reason that you're here, is to improve your messaging. Now, again, the language that you speak, English may not be your first or primary language. So we need to sort of factor that into where there's some elements that would make things easier to communicate. What's the level to consider as a strong communicator in the self-assessment? I think, I would say that 12 to 13 or higher probably puts you in that stronger range. But again, there's always ways to improve your communication, regardless of where you are, to make your structuring a little bit more, I would say, crisp with your audiences. So, think about somebody who is good at communicating, and we'll define what the term is and then have you go back and think about putting in the chat what they do. So communication and messaging that we're amalgamating for this discussion today, we pulled together a couple of different concepts. The idea is there's some basic management communication. I'm communicating with you if we work together. What is it that ultimately seems like we want to communicate message-wise effectively? What is it that we want to do? How do we want to craft those communications that make sense to the people and can be decoded by them effectively? But there's also what we would call leadership communication, and the clear messaging is a combination of those things. Ultimately, it's not just inside, but maybe even outside our organization, internal and external audiences that align more with, I would say, the higher level strategic imperatives that we have. So something else to consider, as Noreen's pointed out, it's not just how we think we message, but how other people receive it. And you'll see that here in a moment. But the challenge for us is to deliver strong, clear messages that get people motivated, typically motivate them towards action, build excitement around goals that we have organizationally, both inside and outside our own organization. Now think for a minute about somebody who is good at communicating. And I think some of you, I just noted in the chat, maybe when you did your assessment, you could redo it if you like, thought about how well does this person communicate, you rated them. But now just think about their behaviors. What is it that the people that you work with who are good at communicating do? What are some of the behaviors that they exhibit or actions that they take? You can go ahead and put those in the chat too. So when you think about they leave room for silence, so certainly give some space to other people to communicate as well. What else on the messaging side? When they craft messages, they're persuasive. The messages have some element of persuasion and then that move or motivate us toward action. That's a really good one. If you're giving the message verbally, they pace their speaking. We talked about this last month. Respect and understanding of the audience is very big. There's an element of authenticity. I love that. Clarity, simple, easy to understand. Angela, good to see you. Thanks for that. They're able to create a connection, even if it's the written word. Empathy, right? These are all really good. So this is an experienced audience. Some of you probably don't need this, or this is just reinforcing. If you're doing it in person, there's an element sometimes of body language that could be helpful. Yeah, it's important to keep people's attention, right? If they're droning on, it's not usually very helpful. So these are really, really good. So most of us have had, there's an emotional aspect. Good, really good. I appreciate you sharing that. So most of us have been around or work for somebody who is a good communicator. We'd say, well, the person is effective. And you see the things, the consistency with which we observe the kinds of behaviors and actions that people engage in to be effective in the role. So then we want to think about, okay, so where are the things that we can do differently? Now, before we get into the messaging piece, I want to just sort of highlight this very fundamental framework about communications. Essentially, it's a basic communication process, not created by me, but by these researchers, Shannon and Weaver, many years ago. So whenever we give a message, we probably rarely think about these steps, but there is a process that plays out. There's information that we have. Oftentimes it's in our mind, or we find information that we want to communicate or we want to message. We have to encode that communication and information into some type of message that we can then send or signal through a channel that is then received by an audience, can be an individual group of people who decodes the message to interpret it. And then it sort of lands with them, if you will, inside of their mind or however they interpret that message. So it's this process of taking information, encoding it, communicating it through a channel so that it can be received, decoded, and then ultimately understood. But we also recognize that when we're sending messages, there's all kinds of noise. People are busy. The message may diffuse and it may not be fully understood. It can be redundant. Some of us get the same emails or variations on them regularly. It's all kinds of other information. Some of it can be conflicting. And then also that sometimes we don't, if you get a lot of email, which I would imagine many of you do, there's just so many things, only so many things in the course of the day that oftentimes you can pick up. You have to spend a lot of time carefully going through your email. But if you send messages in email, you recognize that sometimes those messages get lost. So we're always working through, at some degree, a basic communication process like this. And it's useful to keep that in mind as we go. Now, the process that Laura Downing and I created is really around these 5 C steps. We always try to simplify it so that we can work through a simple structure that enables us to improve whatever we're doing from a skills standpoint. So we think there's 5 things that you can work through. And I'm going to do a deep dive, especially in the area of create. I'm going to give you a frame, and then we're going to dive into the create, I think, a little more. You'll find that hopefully pretty useful. So the first thing is you got to answer the why question. What is the purpose of this message? Why am I sending it? Whether it's an email, it's a text, you're going to have a conversation with somebody or create a set of PowerPoint slides. What is it that we're doing? That's why we put the objectives up front. You have to consider the needs of the audience. So asking you, how do you think about communication? What do you think is important? These help me understand as the person communicating or providing the message in this place and getting your feedback, which is also a really important part of the process. What do you want to hear? What do you know already? What should I tell you more about, or maybe tell you less about? We spend a lot of time thinking about how to create the message. Understandable, right? We're doing that process of information and encoding it. But there's some basic structural elements. I'm going to spend two elements of this I really wanted to highlight today that I think will be helpful for you. And some of this may not be new. You want to choose the medium or the channel in which you're going to communicate, email versus face-to-face. There's some channels are better than others, and you'll see a little graphic on that. And then you want to send the message, and you need to test whether or not the audience received the message too. Just because you sent it and you did a great job crafting it and creating it doesn't necessarily mean that they received it, because there's a lot of noise, as we talked about earlier. But these are the 5 C's that we think about that are in the book, that are in the workbook too, if you want to up your game, so to speak, in the area of communication. Now, some good news at the outset, and that should be a picture of Aristotle. The basic elements of a message really have not changed in thousands of years. And many of you probably already know this, I would be surprised if you hadn't heard of some of these terms, if not all of them. But it's really these 3 pieces, this ethos, pathos, and logos. And I saw some of this coming through in the chat before around when you create a message. So fundamentally, when you're sending a message, you want to try to incorporate these three different elements. First is someone had authenticity in the chat, which I think is great. It's your own credibility as someone, your own character as the person creating and sending this message. Are you believable? And this is what we talked about in our last session on executive presence. Are you somebody that you're technically skilled? Remember, we talked about that confidence and that sort of credibility and the capability overall. Are you someone that's credible on this topic? And that just comes from being experienced in your role and working in an organization over time and building your own personal brand, as we talked about. And several people said this in terms of empathy or even sympathy. Do you understand and can you connect with the audience at an emotional level? If I sit here, I'm sitting and just communicate information to you, that's not going to be as meaningful as if I connect with you individually, or at least as a group. You want to hear about this because many of you are trying to be more effective in your roles. So understanding what your needs are and thinking and getting feedback around how I can do a better job of that and understand what some of your pain points are is helpful in creating that emotional connection with you and the audience in general. And that's important. You're going to feel a lot better, right? That, to Jackson's point, feelings, identity, that idea of connecting with you and demonstrating that, I understand where you're coming from is going to be more effective than just providing this information. But at the end of the day, it also has to sit on some logic, and we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive on that in a minute. So there has to be an order and a structure that flows. If you flow out of order or it doesn't hold together, and I was just talking with a couple of colleagues about this the other day, even in teaching, when I'm teaching in the class, in a sense, essentially this is the same thing online, people want to know, what are we talking about? Why is it important? Where are we going? What's the flow? It's helpful for people to follow along or follow the bouncing ball, so to speak. But whenever you create a message, think about, what's your authenticity, credibility, ethos with the audience? Are you connecting with them from a pathos standpoint, empathy wise? And then is your message, are you developing it and designing it with a structural, sort of logic-based element to it? So I think this isn't a key takeaway. You can almost just create a checklist, right? I'm sending out an email. It's an important one. Is the credibility there? Have I talked about what I've done? Is the empathy there? Am I connecting with you? Am I demonstrating my knowledge of the audience's needs? And is there a logical flow to that? We can do that literally in any message to a lesser or greater degree, but I'd really encourage you to keep that in mind as you're sending out your messages. Now, let's dig into these steps. When we get to the third step around crafting or creating the message, I'm going to do a deeper dive, but why do people communicate? Well, we're typically trying to find information out at one level, right? I want facts, I want information, I want ideas. If you're in a meeting, hey, what do you think about this? What are your perspective? Like we did at the outset, hey, when you've seen somebody communicate who's an effective communicator, what have you noticed? I want some information. I want some ideas from you. I want to get a sense of how well you know this topic, and it's clear you know it pretty well. So I want to gauge my responses accordingly. Ultimately, we want to think about what it is we're doing with this communication, whether it's outbound or inbound. We want to send the same. If we've got to share ideas and facts, we want to share those in a way that's efficacious with the audience. So it really behooves us to do that in a way that is, in fact, structurally sensible. Oftentimes, we want to inspire some form of action. We want people to do something, buy something or get on board with an initiative or whatever the case is. These are just illustrations. Come to a meeting, whatever. We want to generate some level of interest and action. Sometimes it's like we're doing here. There's some form of education. I want to inform people or instruct people around something. There's a healthy element of persuasion. Maybe it's, I don't want you to do anything necessarily, but I want you to think differently. So I might try to persuade you or just promote goodwill. I mean, there's lots of different reasons why people communicate. When you're sending out deliberate structured messages, whether it's in a presentation format like this, whether you're actually having a conversation or you're sending an email, letter, report, whatever it is, ask yourself, and it's not an academic question, why am I doing this? And then what are the things that I want to have as an outcome? It's useful to think about that in advance before you jump into the details of the creation of the message. So once you've thought about what it is you're doing, there's some things you want to think about, and that really revolves around the audience. And I saw that in the chat as well. How will the audience react to this message? What do I think they're going to do? Like I actually, before I came on today, I had my colleagues, Jonathan and Allison, sit in. I said, hey, I'm thinking about sharing their slide, and I wanted to see their reaction. They said, oh, that's interesting. Maybe we should change it like that. So they were sort of a proxy for the audience, which is great. That's what you want. You want to test how people will likely react before you send the message. And there's usually people that you can solicit that information from. Where are people coming from? What's their frame of mind? I don't want to be here in this meeting, or I'm delighted to be here. I have something else to, I just want to come for a few minutes. You get a sense of what's on people's mind before you start. What's your knowledge on the topic? Like, that's why we do the surveys up front, the little test, like, where do you need additional help, or where are the things that you're already at a higher level of sophistication? We don't want to spend time on those. Is this message going to land with you? Or will you be frustrated by it? If these are things that don't square with what you're hoping to hear, you're going to feel like you're not investing your time wisely. And the same thing is true when you send out a message to an audience. What's your understanding of the audience, and how likely or receptive will they be to your message? Think about what your audience's needs are. What do they need to hear from you? And it goes back to that point Allison made again around what leaders ought to be doing in the workplace to meet the expectations and needs of their audience. So what are the things that my audience really needs to hear from me? That's what we want to build into our messaging. But in order to do that, we have to consider their needs first. And then create. We're going to actually create the message. My guess is most people move to this step pretty quickly. You just sit down, you create the email, send the text, you're just going to have the conversation. You're probably less so with a formal presentation, but the idea is you want to think about the opening. You want to think about the kind of terminology or verbiage that you can use. Less is usually more as a rule. You want to talk about transitions between one part and the next, so that's logical. And then you want to have a strong ending so people feel like you've kind of tidied things up. Now, I want to give you a deeper dive on something to keep in mind to craft your message. So we talked about the ethos, pathos, and logos. Always keep that in mind as a sort of general construct. Some of you may have seen this book. I'm not advocating you buy the book. That's not the point. I'm saying within this book written by Barbara Minto, who is a McKinsey consultant, is a really useful way to structure business communication. I'd argue communication in general. And this is just a snapshot from what you find on Amazon. So again, I want to be clear, I'm not promoting the book, but I am suggesting that you'll think that this structure, if you've used it before, I think can be very helpful. And if you're not familiar with it, it's actually, there's courses on it, things like that. It's actually handy to have, because it really does get you to think about how to organize your communication, whether it be written or whether it be verbal. And I actually use this, and I've used this in my teaching when I've taught cases, business school cases. I have students submit one-page summaries of their case findings. And the first several times they do it, they find it very frustrating. It's hard to write in this format clearly. But over time, what I found is students who really work at it become really, really strong communicators. And I think that helps you, whether it's a text message, an email, conversation, or what have you. So let me tell you a little bit about it if you've not seen it before. So I'm going to share this little example with you. Take a look at this letter from a friend, and I'd be interested to see in chat, what do you think? I didn't create this, so I want to be clear. I cited the author at the bottom there. So take a look read this simple message. What do you think about it? Just put it in chat. What's your reaction to this message when you see it? Alina, I see your question. We'll maybe take that one at the end. That's a longer conversation. But those are very formulaic, by the way. What are people's responses to this? What do you think about this particular message? Too long? Okay. What else? Thanks, Carmen. Anything? Buried the lead. List of things not concise, no listening. It's definitely not positive. A lot of stuff in there. Thanks, Karen. Very wordy. All right, too many questions. The format seems ridiculous. Okay, now be honest. It could be, yeah. Well, I think it's a humorous example, so it definitely comes across a little bit as child. It's a stream of consciousness. These are great. It's a narrative, right? So, but let's be honest here. How many of you, and you don't have to respond, how many of you have sent something like this to somebody? Think about more of your personal lives, right? You penned a letter like this, or an email, or whatever. I mean, we don't write letters anymore, right? Recognize this. Yikes! Thanks, Sarah. But this is not uncommon in how people communicate, right? It's like a bunch of thoughts I have. It's not clear necessarily how they're pulled together, and they're communicated in a way where someone said the real point is at the end. So the pyramid principle is designed, and it's been around for quite a while, to sort of remedy this, especially in writing, but in presentations too. And the summary is like this, right? There's different ways. There's inductive and deductive logic. If you look at the book, you can get into that. I won't do that here. We don't have time. But the idea is you want to give your governing thought or primary point at the outset. So, dear Shirley, I hate you. It gets a little strong, and clearly doesn't want to be your friend anymore. And then there's supportive points that go underneath. You stole my boyfriend. You insulted my mother. You scared my cat. Now, the premise here is that thinking through how someone, remember, will decode, how you're going to encode and how someone will decode that communication matters. So you want to give them the key point of the communication up front. That's the governing thought. And then you want to have supporting elements that give the reasoning. Now, this may not have there's, to Angela's point, there's a lot of emotion in this. And it would be useful to cool down. But remember, when you send an email to someone or you're putting together a presentation, you want to use this kind of format where you say, okay, here's what I'm going to cover today, or here's the purpose of this email, and here's the supporting points. And you can think about that, whether it's a bulletized point list or whether it's in paragraphs. And again, in paragraphs, as you go down, and the book talks through this, each paragraph has a summary point at the top and then supporting elements or it's really a question and then answering process underneath it. So the idea behind the pyramid principle and really structuring your communication is like this. So this is the last element of this particular illustration is, you're answering these questions, what's the purpose? It goes back to this kind of clarifying what you want, why are you sending this? Well, the person who receives this is going to say, look, clearly Lucy does not like me anymore. And the reasoning is supportive of that. I stole her boyfriend, I insulted her mother, I scared her cat. And that's really evidentiary. It's a form of evidence or support for the premise that Lucy doesn't like me anymore. And when you craft a message, again, whether it's written, I think that's usually the best way to start, or it's given verbally, find out the key message before you get into the details. Pull yourself back and say, and literally using an outline in the book, or you can do this on your own, you can actually create the pyramid structure. I've done that before with people, is what is it that I'm trying to communicate? Put the supporting elements, which really answer the questions underneath it, and put it in this structure. It's you essentially break it down. So you'd have an overall point to your email. If you each subordinate, I'm saying email just as an illustration, if each subordinate paragraph would have that kind of main point and then supporting sentences under it. It's a great way to write. It's a great way to, it's actually, this is pulled from some researchers who said, look, if you're writing a scientific paper, do it this way, but it transcends that. It's well beyond just a scientific paper. It's a good way to communicate. And it's especially useful if any of you are familiar with storyboarding and creating the presentations. This is a form of doing that. So I use bullet points too when I can. So it is definitely, to Dan's point, it's the bottom line up front. Yeah, clearly, Pete, we're not advocating that anyone do these things. It's intended to be a humorous illustration of the concept. So, and I certainly no case on doing any of these things in real life. But the idea is, how do we structure communication? And this is a very useful way. And it may take, and I think in your writing, just to give you a little bit of perspective, you may have to rewrite a couple of times before you get your final email and test it with some people or your presentation. It's a good thing to do, because the more you do it, the easier it'll become and the stronger you'll get at it. So that's kind of, in addition to the ethos, pathos, and logos, this pyramid principle and structure in your writing and speaking is actually one of the core takeaways for today. Now, when you're giving your message, it's important to think about, when I was talking about email earlier, what's the right channel for the message? Okay, so there's richer channels, there's higher impact, high effort, usually a smaller communities or audience with whom you're speaking. And then there's leaner channels that oftentimes end up with lower impact, but they require lower effort. If it's a really important message, you can have a personal or sensitive element to it. Sometimes you want to do that face-to-face or in some type of video event. The phone still works, believe it or not. But you want to oftentimes have something that's interactive in nature. It's high impact, but there's a lot of effort that goes into it. It doesn't have the same reach necessarily as, say, something like email or a pre-recorded video. If you're sending out an email, or if you've ever sent out a letter, people still do, any type of written document for mass communication, bulk, email, posters, flyer. I mean, those are lean channels. They're lower impact, but they're lower effort too. And the question is, how impactful is that? We were talking about something here at work the other day around, does advertising work? And it's, if you put up billboards, you do radio advertising or anything like that, which people still do, it's always hard to gauge the impact, right? So, you send the message through the channel, but you don't necessarily know what the outcome is going to be, because you don't have the luxury of determining how someone's reacting to it real time as you do with a richer channel. So the point here is give some thought to the channels that you're choosing. Sometimes use multiple channels. The more important the message, you may have to do it in multiple channels over time, but it certainly is predicated on having a good, crisp message to begin with. And then lastly, send the message. You want to prepare and get yourself to the position where you communicate things and test them in a logical way, whether it's slides, whether it's a written email, even in a text. Be sure that you test and think through what it is you're trying to communicate, and outline. Believe it or not, I know that's out of 8th grade for many of us. It still works. And over time, you want your messages to be shorter and punchier. Remember the Lucy example. It really got streamlined from that, as someone pointed out, stream of consciousness down to a bulleted list. That's just a lot easier for someone to understand. You don't want to leave the vagaries of figuring out your message to your audience. You want to try to make it as plain and clear to them as possible, so your message has the highest likelihood of getting across. Practice. It's okay to practice your presentation. It's okay to run your thinking by someone else. The more you work through something and think about it in advance, the higher the likelihood you'll refine it to the point where the impact likelihood is very high. Versus, I just put together a quick message and I'm sending it out. Then you end up having to do, if it's not done well, a lot of clarification after the fact, and that's unfortunate. And then, you give it, ready yourself. It goes back to a little bit we talked about previously with executive presence. Ready yourself to give the message in a way that's going to be useful and going to have the highest impact. It's going to bolster your own credibility, right? That's critical. So just to kind of wrap up and think about what you want to emphasize. So again, I would really highlight thinking through those sort of Aristotelian elements of messaging in terms of ethos, pathos, and logos. I would definitely give some thought to using that pyramid structure, whether you buy the book or not, or do any other research on it is up to you. But that bottom line up front with the supporting elements, you don't need to read a book to figure out how to do that. And then test it with someone. Is this message clear? And use an outline if you can. But remember, when you're creating and crafting messages, people are different. They want to hear different things. They receive information differently. And it's very possible that different audiences may need different messages. While we'd like to think that one message will reach everybody equally, that may not be the case. So really give some thought to what you're trying to do, the why, and then the audience's needs as you're creating that message. Check for confusion. Words, idioms, examples, things like that. They can oftentimes have multiple meanings. They don't land with people well. It's really, really critical that you have to think about how will this message, which works with one audience, work with another audience, get someone to test it for you, because it may not be the case. I was giving a presentation a couple of weeks ago and in another country, and I said, I want to tell people it's kind of like a Reese's peanut butter cup. There's peanut butter on the inside, chocolate on the outside. And like the partner I was working with, who's not from the US, said, well, we don't eat those here. And I said, are you sure people don't eat those there? He said, oh, no, we don't eat peanut butter cups here, which wasn't exactly true because people were familiar with it. But the point is well taken. There are some simple examples that we put in communication that we assume we can take as universal when in fact they're not. Again, I can't emphasize this enough. It's one of my sort of life mantras is less is more. Try to have less information rather than more information. Sometimes when we communicate, we feel like we have to get everything and every piece of information and important element attached to this one message or in this presentation. It's not true. You have to think about what's the likelihood people are going to take all of the message away. It's pretty low. So what are the key things that you want people to take away? That's why I keep highlighting ethos, pathos, logos, the pyramid principle. Because I'm thinking like, if they only take a couple of things away, and it's all in the 5C methodology, but if they only take a few things away, what are the most important bits that you'll take away that will be helpful to you in your work? So that's what I wanted to cover today. Hopefully that's been illustrative and giving you a few things to think about. I know we have some questions coming in, and Allison will absolute peanut butter and jelly. We'll have some thoughts as well, but we'll go ahead and stop here in a minute. But just remember, coming up in May, we'll be talking about, I'm sorry about that. That's not right. It's not executive presence. We'll be talking about relationship building in May, and then talent development is what's going to be coming up in June. So thank you for that. Allison, let me throw it back. Lucy, I'm sorry, Jabari. You don't even know Lucy, Jabari, to be honest with you. I don't think you know any Lucys, but I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Ed. That was incredible. And thank you to everyone who has been here, present, and participating today. Your voices make a really big difference. And we would love to get your voice on shaping the future of our program. So I have some questions for you first, and then we will answer the questions that you have for us. And so I am going to launch a poll right now. The poll is launched now, and this poll is going to help shape the future of the programs that we offer at the Brown School of Professional Studies. Our mission is to empower you with the skills that you need to change the way the world works for good. And that is only going to work if we are offering the right programs. So the poll that you have on the screen right now that I would love for you to respond to is around what programs you would like us to prioritize in the future. Question 1 is, which of the following courses would you be interested in enrolling in? Option 1 is a sustainability and ERG certificate program. Option 2 is a marketing and go-to-market strategy short course. Option 3 is a technology leadership short course. And option 4 is a behavioral economics and decision-making short course. And for that question, you can select as many options as you would like. You don't have to limit yourself to one, though you're welcome to if only one stands out to you. Question number 2 is, how likely would you be to enroll in a Brown Women's Leadership short course? And the options for that is not applicable, would never enroll, unlikely to enroll, on the fence about enrollment, likely to enroll, or would definitely enroll. Question number 3 is, how likely are you to enroll in a mindfulness-based blood pressure reduction course? This course is an evidence-based program to reduce systolic blood pressure. It takes place over 8 weeks with 2.5-hour weekly sessions and 1 full day practice session for $650. And the options for that are not applicable, would never enroll, unlikely to enroll, on the fence about enrollment, likely to enroll, or would definitely enroll. And the last question, question 4, is, which AI topic would you most like to attend a free masterclass on? And that one, please only select one. AI foundations, so just the basics, the evolution of jobs in the AI and digital economy, AI and sustainability, strategy design and execution for the AI and digital economy, or leadership for the digital economy. It looks like we have about 60% of responses in. Thank you so much. This is super helpful. We do take these results incredibly seriously when we are planning the future of our programs. And we're right now starting to plan for our early 2025 launches. So this is exactly the time where we need to know what courses you want us to offer. So we have 82% of the results in. That's great. Thank you. And so I'm going to leave this open for 10 more seconds, and then I will close it. I also want to remind you that if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box, not the chat box. Too many things come in both places, so I can only kind of look at one at once. So if you have a question for Ed, please click on the bottom bar of your Zoom, click on Q&A, and type and submit your questions there. I'm going to leave this open for 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you. That's super helpful. I'm really appreciative, and I'm looking forward to building some new courses with your input. So now we are going to move to answering your questions. And one question that came up for you, Ed, is, can you weigh in on why TED Talks are so effective and compelling?
Yeah, it's a good point. So I have not given a TED Talk yet. I'm not sure I ever will, but my understanding from folks that have is there's a formula that they use. You can go and there's a TED speaker's guide you can find. But there's a very clear formula for explaining, what the topic is, why it's important, why the audience should care, and walking through attention getting information in some form of evidence or personal examples that make it relevant to the audience. And you can go to TED and obviously see lots and lots of different ones, but the idea is it does follow a formula that works. A lot of things do, and that's why we give these sort of backgrounds. They typically, I can't say definitively, but my guess is they draw on some pretty clear structural elements that make it relevant for the audience. Because again, people are used to and have been acculturated to getting information certain ways. So we tend to want to make sure we provide information in that format, and TED follows a format for them that has been proven to work over time. That's a good question.
Thank you. Next question is, what is the best way to be concise and clear in verbal communication when you're asked a question in a meeting or other ad hoc synchronous voice communication?
Yeah. So I think first off, think for a minute about what you're going to say. Before, we have a tendency to want to respond and jump in and start, and then we're sort of thinking as we're going. But I would say give yourself a little bit of time first, really understand what the core of the question is. And you can also ask for clarification. So if you were sitting here, I might say, okay, well, what specifically would you like to know? Because I may not exactly understand what you're getting at, or you may be thinking of this challenge or opportunity differently than I may be thinking of it. So sometimes it's helpful to ask for a clarification. So what specifically are you asking about? What part about being clear, concise would you like to know more about? And usually people ask, they'll say, well, I'd really like to know, how do I avoid being, I'm not suggesting you're saying this, how do I avoid going on too long? But then once you've clarified, if you need to, what the core of the question is, you can give one or 2 points saying, well, once you've had a chance to pause and think about it, you've clarified what the question is, think about 2 or 3 things that would be helpful, like telling them to first pause, and then secondly, making sure you clarify what the question is before you respond, and then just answering that succinctly. So I tried to demonstrate that approach a little bit here without getting overly wordy or taking up too much of your time. Does that make sense? So I think work through a structure, even simply in your own approach to that would be beneficial.
Thank you. Next question
Sure.
is, how do you correct a misunderstanding when they occur?
That's very interesting. So again, I think misunderstandings occur commonly in communication. It's usually not what I said versus it's more along the lines of what you heard. Just because I think I said something clear doesn't mean that you heard something clear, or my message was encoded in a way that enabled you to decode it in a way that was, I would say, representative of the messaging that I was trying to give. The best thing to do, I found, is ask somebody, okay, what about this? Which part of this communication was not helpful or didn't make sense to you? And one of the things I try to do is put it in that person's perspective versus I thought I was being very clear. First person, what didn't you understand about what I said? I typically try to say, oh, help me understand which parts of the message that I was trying to communicate didn't make sense or were unclear, because I don't know what that is, because I think I was very clear. Oftentimes people, if you are truly listening, which is a big part of communication, not necessarily messaging per se, is trying to understand what the other person heard. And usually if we give people space to clarify what their understanding is, then we can better craft or recalibrate the message. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't understand when you asked that question about giving responses in meetings. I didn't understand you were talking about meetings that were in this location or these types of meetings. And then I might change my messaging accordingly, if that makes sense. But I think very simply asking, okay, what about the communication wasn't clear? What could I have made a little more illustrative? I find that usually gives people the space to talk and explain what they didn't understand. That makes sense? Hopefully it does.
Thank you.
Sure.
And the next question is, how do you handle people who interrupt you constantly when you're trying to communicate a message?
That's a really interesting point. I mean, all these questions are good. Sometimes, so I would say that's sort of case by case or situationally dependent. It can be and the question is what's causing that, right? And that's hard to know what someone who's doing that. It may be the case, and I don't know for sure, that the person doesn't know they're doing it. They just, the nature of the workplace today, people come at it from a lot of different backgrounds. They may just, something pops into my mind, I need to say it. So they may not be aware that they're interrupting. Sometimes people interrupt intentionally. It's can be a form of sort of demonstrating one's authority. I'm cutting you off. What I have to say is more important than what you have to say. for instance. So there's different ways to handle that. If you want to handle it all, quote unquote, outside of the meeting, you might just ask the person, hey, express how you feel. Like I've noticed a few times when I'm communicating, you have things to say and I'm not able to finish. I didn't know if you were aware of that. Then they may or may not be. Say, I just appreciate the opportunity to finish. And if you have something to add, then by all means go. If they're doing it for a different reason, and it is in the context of a meeting, sometimes you need to say, Allison, I really would like to, I'd like to finish this point before you speak. You don't have to be rude about it, but you stop the person and say, I'd really like to finish my point, or it's essential that I get an opportunity to express the full thought before we respond to it, out of fairness to everyone else. So there's different techniques you can use. You just have to be careful of the environment and the sort of the structure that you're using them in. And every organization is different, cultures are different. You might try it one-on-one first just to see if the person is aware of it. But if it's a habituation, you may want to stand your ground. We talk about this in politics a little bit and say, Allison, I've noticed that the last couple of times I'm speaking, you've cut me off. I'd really like to finish. Sometimes that will help.
Thank you. And it's interesting you mentioned politics, because we've got a couple questions about political issues. And so there's kind of two questions I'm going to combine into one.
Sure.
Question is that as we're seeing more and more polarization, how do we handle that in the workplace to make sure that we still have teamwork and that we can all hear one common message, even though kind of the larger context around us is getting like more and more polarized? And then the second question, which is different, is would you say yes to a speaking opportunity if the organization asking you is on the other side of the issue that you believe in?
Well, the second one is kind of a personal question, so I don't know if I could answer that. I think someone would have, that gets back to somebody's values. And I could see either side of it. One might, again, I'm not speaking for anybody, so I'm just giving a point of view. One might be inclined to say, I don't share the same values as this organization. I don't feel comfortable doing it. That's certainly a possibility. Another view might be, well, perhaps I could share my different perspective with this organization, being respectful of their perspective and just present the other side of the issue or another way of looking at things. Now, that could be challenging. It depends on the nature of the audience. They may not be inclined to listen to that. On the first question, I'm trying to think of what it was, Allison. You go back and refresh my memory around.
Yeah.
This was the polarization in the workplace.
Yes.
Yeah, this is exceptionally thorny topic today. I wouldn't disagree that we've seen some level of polarization in a broader society. Certainly in academia, we've seen it over the last several months. And as the elections come up, for whatever the case, I would imagine we'll see even more of that. It's hard to answer, though. It's hard to give just do this and this is what will happen. It doesn't work like that. I think one of the things that's important fundamentally in the workplace is being respectful of your colleagues and recognizing everyone has a different viewpoint. And people typically want to share, take care page. People want the opportunity to share that viewpoint. And I think it's, again, I want to be clear, I'm not speaking as a representative, I guess I am, but I mean, this is more of a point of view personally. I think it's okay for people to respectfully share their viewpoint, even if it's different than other people's. And I think my point of view is in the workplace, we sort of have an obligation to acknowledge and give those people the space, give someone the space to share their viewpoint. We don't have to agree with it, but it's useful to give people the space to share it. And I think what is helpful in polarization is to create an environment where people feel safe and comfortable sharing things, and that their point of view will be respected and that they're respected. Sometimes leaders and managers have to make choices in organizations, and letting people know that I hear what you're saying and I don't disagree or I acknowledge it. That said, we have to do something like this. So I want you to know that we're trying to take what you said into account, but also as an organization, we may have to do these things. I'm not suggesting that will solve polarization issues, but I think the fundamental to polarization issues are oftentimes the way we handle the polarization is we don't necessarily give people the space to have a conversation. I think this is one of the thorniest issues we're facing on campuses today is people want to share different perspectives. And I think that the challenge is how we share that information and how well we receive that information. So people feel like I can share something and I won't be criticized or marginalized for my point of view, even if that point of view is different than a lot of people's. And I think that's really kind of what a safe, comfortable environment is supposed to be like. And recognizing that we have very different perspectives, but it's important for us to figure out a way to share those in a respectful way.
Thank you so much. We are unfortunately out of time, which is such a bummer because there are so many amazing questions, but I thank everyone so much for your incredible engagement today. You really rounded out the session with your contributions in the chat and your
Yeah, great.
amazing questions. And I want to thank you, Ed. As always, I always learn so much from you in these sessions and appreciate how applied and applicable these sessions are. And I think I can speak for everyone here that we have learned something tangible that we can take away and implement into day-to-day leadership today. And we hope that all of you will join us for our next lessons in leadership,
On
which
relationship building, yeah.
On relationship building, which will take place next month. And we will send an email with the link to register for that and a recording and the slides for today's session as well. Thank you all so much, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.